The Iron Claw. That's right, folks. This might be the final surprise to come out of the year. I think every other movie that's going to be like between now and the end of the year have been things people have been hyped up, they've been excited about. The Iron Claw, not that it came out of nowhere, but it was definitely not one that I think was on a lot of people's radar. It was like, yeah, okay. End of the year, Zac Efron's doing his wrestling biopic based on one of the most infamous families in wrestling. And that I'm sure is going to make a lot of people interested. Wrestling movies tend to do pretty good. The fans of actual wrestling that know the history are always going to come out to see these things. This type of story always works for a good biopic. And Zac Efron, he's a guy who you're always watching his career, just kind of waiting to see what's going to take off for him, what's going to give him the run that he kind of deserves. The Iron Claw, not something I was expecting to be that much of anything. I had limited expectations going into this, and I am happy to say, blew me away. This is an incredible movie. One of these surprises at the end of the year where I went in thinking, like, I'm going to enjoy this. Like, I like this family. I like the idea that the story is presenting to me. I like all the actors in this. I think there's a really interesting story to explore, especially in today's climate where we've kind of seen a lot of, like, takedowns of toxic masculinity recently in films where it's like, what does it mean to push you to this limit? How does that affect your brain when maybe you're not supposed to do that, when you don't want to do that? So that is clearly something that's going to work for today's audience. And this movie is just a gut punch. It is just so intense and gripping. It just chokeholds you from the beginning up until the very end. It does not give you time to breathe. There is no brevity to it. You're just in here for the entire runtime, just fighting for your life to see, like, okay, is this going to end positively? Is this going to go in the right way? How are we going to handle this situation? This movie is about the legendary wrestling family, the Von Erichs, and if you are not familiar with that story, I'm not going to be the person here to tell you every single detail about it. The movie glosses over a couple aspects of it where there's another person in the family that they don't even put in this movie, and you see that the screenwriter and director kind of both agreed, like, we could have the other son in this movie, but at a certain point it kind of becomes like this repetition where we're kind of just going around the same thing. It keeps happening in the same way. So them not doing that, I get it. You know, like, that's fine, but this is a family of wrestlers. There is about 4 particular brothers that we follow in this movie, and all of them, in some capacity, do what they do to impress their father because it's expected of them in a world where they can't really be anything else, and that leads them to have certain aspects of their life be taken over maybe by drugs, maybe just by this need to escape, and it leads to tragedy at every single turn. This is not a happy ending. This is not like a happy story where you're going to walk away fully being like, oh man, like they came out on top. This doesn't end well for, I think, anybody. Like the movie itself does end on a more positive note than I was expecting considering what we saw through the rest of the movie. But it's kind of beautiful in that tragic way where you're like getting a distilled formulaic in a cinematic way version of like what these brothers went through, and if anything that could lead to a larger conversation about what this industry does to you, what this pressure does to you, and those types of things, which I really love. And what really works for this movie is that we see those pressures come in every single form, like the actual physicality of these men having to put themselves to this limit when they're like working out, when they're pumping all this iron trying to be strong, when it feels like it's breaking their body and their muscles, to just the verbal abuse where there's no love or support coming their way, to the events that happen to them where they can no longer escape this tragedy. It's intense and it's gripping, and it's handled in a very mature way. We don't muck around in any of just like the ambiguity. There is intensity from the beginning at every sequence. Every single frame is just perfectly crafted to make you feel like this is a pressure cooker. It's going to ignite at any moment. Things are not going to end well for anybody here. And that is really intense and scary. It's so well handled. I knew enough about the story going into this. I know enough about wrestling where I can have a conversation about it. And the wrestling side of things I think are very interesting. This is really well filmed wrestling. Like we move the camera perfectly. We have everything work really well. One of my favorite moments in this movie is how it portrays Ric Flair, where he doesn't have like, the concept doesn't have like a lot of presence in the movie. But when he shows up, you've been seeing like this toxic masculinity, like kind of looming over the entire picture, and then in walks this confident, cocky guy in these big robes, just kind of being a little more like loose and goosey with the entire concept, and then suddenly, like the entire idea of like this is hard and it hurts and it's gonna break you, and there's tragedy that's surrounding this event, and then suddenly this guy just shows up and he's just this presence of who gives a shit, and it's just like a perfect contrast to everything we've been seeing. And it makes sense for what these fights are. It's really interesting in that way. It does feel violent. It does feel intense. We know there's like a fakeness to it, but there's a realism to it as well, which is intense and it's cool. And my goodness, you're just not expecting something this powerful at any moment. It is so gripping from the beginning. Like this is the story essentially of Kevin Von Erich, and he's our lead character in this. I won't get into much into why that is, but he is the eldest brother that we kind of tell the story about. And he's the one that kind of comes out of this alive, which is terrifying to say. He is played by Zac Efron, an actor who is just begging for a role like this. I have been following Efron for a while. I was the High School Musical generation. He always felt like he could do more than what was given to him. And then when he didn't become like the typical leading man, he kind of went into other directions. You know, he's like, I'll do a Ted Bundy. That would be interesting. That's him playing with his persona. This is almost like the opposite, where everybody thinks he's like this cool, suave guy, but he's been through some stuff and he's come out on top. And that's kind of the story of Kevin. So you can see why he gravitates to that. He is a brick in this movie. He is so large and thick, like just a dense skull of a man. And you see him slowly, like from the beginning, he's like, you're kind of hard on my younger brothers, to his parents, to him actually having a conversation with a woman for like the first time, to when he's growing up and realizing what life is actually about, and he just wants to be like the protective brotherly figure that he cannot be, to where the movie ends up with him, where he has to realize some of these events he maybe could have stopped in a different capacity, but he doesn't. He can't blame himself for all of it, but he wants to. It's intense, and Efron, while doing the physicality so well, you see the emotions running through him, because this is a guy who hasn't really had to think about these things this way before. Now he's suddenly forced to experience and comprehend stuff beyond him, when he doesn't become like the favorite in the family anymore, where like his younger brothers are now maybe the ones doing better at his career than him, to where he ends up just like it's such a powerful scene at the end of the movie, and I'm not going to like dive too deep into it, but there's a scene at the end of the movie, given all the tragedy that has befallen this family, where it is Efron sitting in a grass field, and he's watching his sons play, just like have fun together, and he just breaks down crying, and then his sons walk over to him, and they're like, Dad, what's wrong? And he's just like, yeah, I just like seeing you guys, because you're brothers, and I used to be a brother, and I'm not a brother. And I'm like, that is some of the best acting of his career, from a very interesting career. And he is so good in this. And I think all of the brothers are very good in this too. They play different types of men who are broken in different ways. The next one that we could talk about is Carrie Von Erich, and this is played by Jeremy Allen White, who's just on the up and up. His career is going to take off, and he's also huge in this movie. Like Carrie in real life was a pretty big guy, you know, one of the big, like, I think it's David that's kind of like the skinnier of the three of them, you know, and then you just had Kevin and Carrie were these bigger guys. Jeremy does so good. He has to convey a lot kind of coming in later in the movie. He was supposed to be like this Olympic athlete in discus, and then suddenly the world changed for him, and that's intense. And you're looking at this guy who kind of just got broken by it, like, wow. And what happens to him? It's intense and real and true. And then Harris Dickinson playing David, he is very strong in this too. Like, another actor on the up and up, and you have like these three guys with very different careers, very different levels of who they are in their careers, and they kind of embody like the same thing that the characters do, where Efron is definitely the one that's been around the longest, the most prolific in this group. And you can see how Jeremy Allen White has also been around in his own field, and now he has to kind of like come into this and connect in that capacity, and the tension could be there both on screen and off screen in terms of like the characters that they play, and it's like the actors. And then Harris is this guy who's just kind of showing up, announcing himself essentially in this, and becomes an audience favorite, becomes the one that could take off in different directions, and that's really interesting too. And then you have Stanley Simons, who plays the youngest brother, Mike, who he's kind of not the black sheep, because that's wrong, but he's the one that's like, wrestling's not in my blood. I'd rather do anything else. And when he has to kind of like step up in the way that he's not physically able to, you see how that affects him in different ways. And a lot of the heavy lifting does rest on the shoulders of their father. And you're seeing it's Holt McCallany who's playing him, Holt McCallany who's playing their father. That is a performance that's hard to nail. And you can feel like Holt is playing this as like, this guy can't think any other way. He's the classic machismo American man. You have everything you want in Texas. You can't escape that feeling. Everything's good. A terrifying type of guy that is going to break a lot of people's lives and break a lot of spirits. And it's very drastic and crazy. And Lily James shows up. She becomes a love interest. And my goodness, like this movie just hits you hard, and it doesn't let up for the entire runtime. It's impressive. It's not like a feel-good movie where I think like you could take your whole family to enjoy it, but out of everything that's kind of out right now, this is one of the most interesting American stories about like maybe like this type of man actually isn't healthy. This type of lifestyle could leave you broken and scared. And like the use of like this brotherly connection, this brotherly love, that is interesting. And that is worth exploring. And that makes it kind of special in its own way. There's a lot of great moments. The script is fantastic. Everything is amazing. Like you're just looking at a complete vision and perfect film that's coming out in a year where this should be Efron's year for the Oscar contention, for awards contention. It's just pretty stacked, and I feel like it's going to be forgotten because it's kind of so late and not everyone's talking about it. But I'll tell you now, this is a hard performance to nail, and he delivers immensely on it. So the Iron Claw, I am going to give an 8 out of 10. Now, thank you all for watching this review. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And of course, I will catch you in the next one. Have fun. Stay safe. Good luck.